I've always been very interested in health and fitness and the sporting lifestyle, and I pretty well had a look through my university courses and what would be applicable, and found a human movement course over in Sydney and gave that a crack. And after 3 years, I had a lot of fun along the way and learned a lot, that I decided that this was going to be the career for me. So I applied to do a honours thesis following my undergraduate degree and got accepted onto the scholarship program at UTS. Completed my honours there, and then after working for a couple of years in the field, applied for a PhD scholarship at the Australian Institute of Sport. Got accepted into that and completed my PhD with the Australian Paralympic swim team at the end of 2008. And then started my career at WAIS, and that's pretty well been my history. My job at WAIS involves working with athletes and coaches in the daily training environment on a daily basis. So we implement testing protocols in line with the national protocols. We monitor athletes' performance during training and at competitions. We also look at other factors, including body composition, to make sure fat mass and muscle mass are where they need to be for athletes' particular sports. We look at recovery strategies, so we implement things like compression garments and ice baths to make sure that the athletes are recovering adequately between training sessions and in the lead up to competition. And we also do a lot of research. So coaches will often come to us with questions as to how they can improve performance, and we can use this as an opportunity to conduct research studies and find out the answers. Dr. Professor Alan Hahn at the Australian Institute of Sport, alongside Associate Professor David Pine, who was my supervisor for my PhD, have had a fairly major impact on my sports science career. Dr. Alan Hahn was responsible for getting me into the PhD program to start with, and David Pine has then been my mentor along the way. They're both godfathers, if you like, for sports science at the AIS, and have been involved in physiology at the AIS for over 20 years. They are just a wealth of knowledge, and I've been able to learn a lot from them along the way. It's really important at a club level that even athletes who are developing their physiological skills are exposed to all aspects of physiology. So this encompasses aerobic training and anaerobic training, i.e. athletes need to be doing long, low intensity qualities of work, and they also need to be doing shorter, high intensity qualities of work, just to make sure that all the energy systems are covered. We also believe that it's important that the principles of physiology are covered. So specificity of training is very important to make sure that the training that is being covered is mimicking the demands of the competition, as well as progressive overload training, so that athletes are not being pushed into high intensities and high durations of training before their years. That is a particularly tough question. I think it's probably fair to say that there's not one big physiology development in the last decade, but all of the current physiological principles that we use have just gotten better. So to give you a couple of examples, altitude training, which has actually been around for years and years and years, as opposed to actually travelling overseas to an overseas destination, athletes can stay at home in the comfort of their normal training environment and be exposed to altitude in an altitude tent that sits over their bed. In terms of ergogenic aids, products such as sodium bicarb and caffeine, again, have been around for years, but we've just got a lot better with the protocols that we use, and also mixing doses of both chemicals to give athletes the best edge. In my role, we do use a lot of different pieces of equipment to monitor athletes' progress. But for the club level, I think heart rate monitors are probably the best tool that coaches and athletes can use. These days, they're readily available in sports stores. They're fairly cheap, very easy to use, they're portable, and they can give a range of feedback. Using a heart rate monitor, coaches can determine athletes' maximum heart rates. They can determine how quickly they recover from a certain exercise. They can even use them to monitor morning resting heart rates. And then during training, they can use them to see what % of the maximum heart rate the athletes are working at. So if the coach has set an athlete an aerobic training session, they pretty well want their athletes to be working at about 60 to 70% of their maximum. By using a heart rate monitor, coaches can then download this information at the end of the training session and make sure that the athletes weren't actually working harder than they should have been. Again, a fairly tough question, and I think to do all sports in Australia justice, we probably need to say that all of our Olympic sports are pretty well on track with their physiological developments. We have an amazing facility available to us in the Australian Institute of Sport, and then in each state we have our state institutes. And with the help of the physiologists Australia-wide, we're able to disclose information and new research across a range of sports. So pretty well all of our Olympic sports are online with their use of physiological developments. Sport in general really benefits from physiology, as physiology is the background to develop successful sporting programs. It allows coaches to base the foundation of their coaching styles on sound physiological principles of the ones that we discussed earlier. And it also gives athletes the confidence that coaches know what they're talking about, and especially when they see results in the training monitoring that we do, the test protocols, and when that executes into a sound performance. For aspiring sports physiologists, I think the key message is just to get in there and have a go. If you can align yourself with any type of sporting organisation or sporting club and show some interest, especially in terms of voluntary hours, there is a huge amount to be gained in the field. So the lab environment and the teaching hall of a university can only really tell you so much. But getting out in the field and having that interaction with coaches and athletes is where a lot of the groundwork of physiology actually happens. So getting involved at that club level is really important, and being prepared to put in some hours there.